Hey everyone, welcome to Panel to Panel. My name is Brian Heater. I am the host of the interview podcast RIYL, and I'm joined by Anthony Ha. Anthony, how are you billing yourself these days?
I'm just a guy, I'm Brian's former colleague at TechCrunch. I have a very strange title, Vice President of Content at a venture capital firm called ENIAC. I also co-host a podcast called Original Content, and I love comics, and so I'm just happy to participate.
Yeah, no, I think Brian's former colleague is probably the
I
way to
should have
go
stopped while
for.
I was ahead.
Yeah, these now. Unfortunately, Heidi McDonald is unable to join due to some last minute scheduling issues. I'm not going to say what they are, but I will assure you that what she's doing right now is as much fun as this is going to be is probably far more enjoyable than doing hosting a Twitter Spaces, and hopefully she'll be joining us when we do another one of these about what the show from now. Wanted to get some of the boring process stuff out of the way up top. We will be posting the audio from the session for posterity on the RIYL YouTube page, so you can listen to anything you might have missed. We did a Clubhouse last time, as we alluded to earlier, and when our friend Bryce was the only person who showed up, we figured that we would give Twitter Spaces a shot, and we've already doubled the number of people that we had over on the Clubhouse, so it's a marked success. Uh,
I have a lot
like
of confidence.
like like last time, we're going to kick off the conversation between the three of us, and after that, we're going to invite anyone to come up and join us with questions and otherwise join the conversation. All right, so excited to introduce our guest this month. Glenn Head has been publishing comics for about 40 years now, close
Yeah,
to.
something like that.
In the 90s, he co-created and edited Snake Eyes with fellow cartoonist Kaz, who has gone on to a very lucrative career as an animator on SpongeBob. Uh, and Glenn has also contributed to various anthologies, including Zero Zero and Hotwire in 2015. Fantagraphics published his memoir Chicago, and earlier this year, he returned to the publisher with Chartwell Manor, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Wanted to kick it off by asking you an extremely elementary question, but this was something that jumped out at me as I was reading this, and I know this is the case with Chicago and some of your other memoirs. I had a momentary uh, moment of doubt as I was reading the book, and I saw that your name was spelled with one N in the
Right.
book, and was worried that I had typoed it all over the place. Um, Glenn with one N is the Glenn Head that appears in all of these books. What is, to your mind, what is the primary distinction, if any, between one N Glenn and two N Glenn?
Well, I'm glad you asked because that wasn't a complete accident, and it does get annoying to you if your name is spelled with two N's and somebody spells it with one. But the reason I did it is basically because for the very simple reason that Glenn with one N is simpler than Glenn with two N's, and Glenn with one N is a cartoon character, is not me in my entirety, but as close as I can make it in the comic book vein. So it's you know hopefully a highly developed cartoon character, but it's definitely simpler than me. So that's really the basic reason, is just because comics are more basic, more simple, and more elementary than human life.
We talked a little bit before we officially kicked off about one very small liberty that you took with the book, that certain scenes take place in an apartment directly above St. Mark's Comics on St. Mark's in Manhattan.
Right.
Um, and beyond that, how much wiggle room did you give yourself in terms of how you portrayed the events that occur in the book?
Well, actually, what I'd say is that that's kind of a rare exception of my doing that. Uh, I guess I basically wouldn't have anything go on in that book that didn't happen. The main thing that's different when you're doing a memoir from when you're telling something, just completely factually, is not that the facts aren't there, but that the timing is compressed. So things that happened, you might compress things that happened over the course of a few months into maybe a few days because it works for the narrative. You know what I mean? Things like that. And in that particular scene that you're referring to, where I had this relationship with a girl who lived above St. Mark's Comics. In actual fact, I don't even think there were apartments above St. Mark's Comics, but I loved it so much, the idea of that world that I was in being right above a comic shop and comics being an essential part of the story, that I just felt like I could take that liberty and get away with it. And sure enough, somebody would notice it, and you did. But I lived all around the Lower East Side during that era, and I had a bunch of different girlfriends, so I went ahead and did it. But basically, I really believe that with the memoir, you really should be telling your story. You shouldn't be bullshitting. You shouldn't be making stuff up and saying it's true. You probably also shouldn't be taking things that happened to somebody else and saying they happened to you. You know what I mean? It feels like a con job. If you're doing that, you may as well write a novel. So I guess that's the answer to that. It's really very accurate. I wouldn't want to take liberties with a story like this, partly because, a lot of what the story is about is what happens to children who have things happen to them in boarding school. The book Chartwell Manor is named after the school that I was at when I was 13. And the book is really about that, and mainly the aftermath of what happens to kids after they've been in a school like this, because they are going to be set on a path and they don't realize what kind of path they're going to be set on. So I want to do that story justice and make it truthful, both to my own experience and the experience of other kids who were there and then went on to, in some cases, some bad endings. So.
And so one of the recurring threads in the book is the fact that people in the book will say to Glenn with one N, and presumably to you in real life, hey, you should do more personal comics. And particularly, it sounds like you should do something with this horrible experience you had at the boarding school. And I think one of the things you've talked about both in the book itself and in some other interviews is that you did it now because you were ready now. And I was curious if you could just talk a little bit more about that process of realizing A, Chartwell Manor is going to be a book, and B, I'm ready to do that book now.
Yeah. I think what happened with that was that, a lot of it seems to me, and this is something that seems really valid to talk about in the context of this discussion, is just that comics are really a lot of work to do, and you really have to have your chops down to be able to do them. And there's all these things you got to learn, as you know, to be able to do comics. And you can multiply that by 10 if you're doing a graphic novel, is my experience. So my first graphic novel, I was really learning the craft and the structure, I guess, of what it takes to do a graphic novel, you know, because it's really working on a different level from the comics that I was used to. And what you can do with a graphic novel is also so much different than a comic, and in a way that was really important to me. And I realized as I was doing Chartwell Manor that one of the reasons why was that you can work with time as part of the themes, one of the themes of what you're doing. You can show things happen across a really vast spectrum of time. And you can't do that with a comic so much. So I found myself really, really enjoying that and really finding it very exciting to work with something that's that ambitious, to work out your whole life story in comic book format, or for that matter, to draw a villain like the headmaster of this school, who was a pedophile, and put him through his paces was really unlike any experience I've had drawing comics before, because it was really looking at him and drawing him and handling him in a way that put me in control, in a way that I obviously wasn't when I was at the school. because I was abused and the other kids were abused, and we had no agency. So, I mean, I think somebody said this, that it may have been Freud, that the cartoonist uh, attempts control over the characters he draws in a similar way to a witch doctor might with voodoo dolls, you know? And I always liked that it's an attempt at control. And I felt like in drawing this book, I really attained that control over the experience and the headmaster. Um, I just think that, like I was saying at the beginning of this, that it just takes a long time to where you get to a point that you can handle material like this. I don't know. It did for me, you know. I mean, this is many decades out from the experience itself, and even a couple of decades from when I first attempted to try and draw this, you know?
Yeah, one of the things that Anthony alluded to, I think, is that there actually is a moment in the book where you essentially sort of sit down and try to take a first pass, or at least try to find a way to tell the
Yeah,
story. And,
yeah.
and you said that, that you can draw your whole life story. Now, obviously, this is not your whole life story, and
Mm-hmm.
we talked about the Chicago book earlier, so you have done memoir and
Mm-hmm.
autobiography.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of the really powerful things that this book does is explore the ways in which these incidents kind of cascade through the rest of your life. Um, were did the events that happened at the school, did they seep into other works that you've done, or was it important for you to really sort of draw a definite line between these stories?
Well, I think they did, just in terms of this. I think what happens to you psychologically when you're a kid, you're drawn to a lot of things in pop culture for reasons you don't always understand. And like the obvious aspect of that, when kids are drawn to superhero comics or drawing them, but definitely to getting into them, it's a fantasy. It's a superhero fantasy that is most likely happening because as children, we don't have agency and we wish we had that agency of being superpowered, right? So that happens to us as kids. And in my case, what I really got pulled into, and I continued on with this for quite a while, drawing comics, was crime comics. And I was really fascinated by crime comics and fascinated by evil characters and the darkness of those worlds. I was really a phenomenal fan of S. Clay Wilson for a lot of years in a lot of ways, because I thought visually his work was really stunning, and I thought he had captured a kind of essence of sexual and violent evil. So I was attracted to this stuff. Now the point is that you're not always aware of why you're attracted to this stuff, and it can take a while before you can really handle it and use it as material. But I guess that's the obvious answer, is like I was always really attracted to that kind of aberrant behavior in comics, and it wasn't until I really looked at some of my own life experiences that I was able to kind of deconstruct it and really take it apart, really work with it, as opposed to just, drawing sadistic, violent comics for a kick, trying to look deeper into what that behavior comes from, you know?
And it felt like, I mean, as you talk about that process, I mean, you also mentioned that the book is as much about, or even more about, the aftermath than the
Yeah.
specific events at Chartwell. And like, um, did you feel like you had a very clear idea about, because you talk about things like alcoholism and your relationship with pornography? Did you feel like that was very clear to you that that would go in the book and that there was a connection, or did that sort of, was that more of a process to kind of figure out what to leave in, what to leave out, and what was connected and what wasn't connected?
Uh, well, I knew all those things were connected. So the short answer to that question is they had to go in. There was really no two ways about
Right.
it. I mean, I knew they were all connected. They all felt connected. And see, one way to look at that is that towards the end of the first chapter, which is the longest chapter in the book, but it's only like maybe a third of the entire book. That first chapter is me at that boarding school, and a couple of things happen towards the end of that chapter. One is I get drunk for the first time and really enjoy it. And the other is I discover pornography. And that's the very end of the chapter. And it kind of ends with the line that it goes something like this. And I learned how to jerk off alone, finally, alone. And that's to indicate that my character has probably pretty much had some damage happen when he was at that boarding school. And now he's got to find his way into something more like normal adolescent sexuality. And that scene that ends with those captions is a pretty dark drawing, a full page drawing of the family home. So it's indicating what's to come. And that was something that I was doing throughout the book. Anything I laid down to show something disturbing, it was usually something I could dig up later on in the book, and there was a reference point for it. But yeah, the answer to that is just that I knew all this stuff was going to have to go into the book if I was going to tell the truth about the experience. And there's really no point in doing a memoir if you're not willing to tell the truth. So
you can go online and look for the headmaster. He has faced some consequences, thankfully, for this.
yeah.
Did you need that? I don't know. I guess is that sort of a definite or semi-definite conclusion to the story that you needed? I mean, did something like that need to occur for you to feel comfortable really sitting down and telling the story?
Something like what?
Uh, the fact that he has been to trial, that he has faced some consequences for his actions.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have a story really, or you wouldn't have a conclusion if you didn't have that happen. So that, yeah, that would have been necessary. I don't know how I would have done this if he had escaped to like some, I don't know, foreign country and was still alive or something. But he's been dead for a while, and I think that what some of this is really about too is dealing with the ghosts of your past. Not just the ghosts of my own childhood and how it was affected, but the ghost of this guy's life and how it had affected other people, and whether he had ever faced up to what he had done, and whether the kids that I knew who had gone through those experiences had been able to face it and carry on. So but yeah, I knew that some kind of conclusion with him had to happen. You know, uh, it had to, for the sake of the other students who were there and for myself as well.
Yeah, I guess part of what I was getting at is almost an idea of closure. And I'm curious whether something like that when something like that happens, whether again it's sentencing or his death, whether that affords you any kind of closure, and whether the process of doing a book like this is an additional form of closure for you.
Well, I guess what I'd say to that is his death wasn't. I didn't know about his death until I was just researching the book and putting it together, and I didn't feel one way or the other about him being dead. I mean, there's a scene in the book where it at first it looks like it might actually be happening, where I'm walking through some graveyard in New Jersey, and then I'm, taking a piss on his tombstone, and then you realize that's just me thinking of that while seeing the tombstone on Google. So, and then realizing it's not even worth a trip out there to do it. So his death didn't make a huge difference to me. And in actual fact, how much he actually meant while I was drawing the book or getting myself there to do it, I don't know that I would have been able to draw the book if he meant a lot to me, because I've spoken to other former students, and the experience of being there is still very much alive. And I don't think you can draw this kind of material if it's really alive for you, because it would be too painful. And that's the thing that I've really experienced from drawing this, is that surprisingly, this was not a difficult book to draw for the most part. I mean, outside of the fact that it demanded a lot of time and I had to work and I had to learn. I had to work very hard to draw children. Drawing kids is tough if you're used to drawing adults. That's an entirely different animal. But that's just the physical process of drawing. In terms of the psychic process of doing it, um, it was a lot of fun. That's a really strange thing to say too, but it was actually very enjoyable drawing this book. I probably was exercising a lot of ghosts and doing it. I think that's probably also it. But like, it felt really necessary to do. And if there's any kind of closure that you get from something like this, it relates to my own thing about being an underground cartoonist, which is that you draw the material that you have to draw. And if the world, and that means anybody, doesn't want you drawing it, that's their tough luck. You are going to draw it. And that, for me, is a major piece of being a cartoonist, and especially an underground cartoonist, is that what you decide you're going to draw and what really matters to you, uh, however it is, whatever it is, and however upsetting it might be to anybody, you're going to draw it, you know? So the fact that I did that and nobody got in my way, that's that's good, that feels good.
Yeah. Did you have you shown this to any of the other students and gotten a response from them?
Um, Actually, there's some kind of Chartwell Manor group on Facebook, and a lot of the former students there are people that I don't know, but they all bought it and liked it, and yeah, I got a really good reaction from a lot of former students, actually. There's one who I've got to send a copy to. I need to get some more from Fantagraphics to do this, but who is actually one of the main characters in the book, and I really hope he likes it, because he's the guy in the book who was instrumental in getting the pedophile Terrence Michael Lynch locked up. So I hope he likes how I depicted him, because yeah, he's going to get a copy soon. And he was a kid that I knew when I was a kid, and a good guy. And as I say, he was involved in getting the guy to cop a plea and take the 14-year sentence.
So I should note, we've only got a few folks on the live version of this, but if you would like to ask any questions or otherwise engage in the conversation, then just request. There's a little button to request to speak. In the meantime, um, one of the things I talk to artists across various mediums about is the idea of distance, which I think, whether they're writers or cartoonists or musicians, people um, find that it's useful both, psychically, as you said, or emotionally, but also creatively, to have some distance between them and the subject matter. I'm curious how
Mm-hmm.
much you think that this book, whether it benefited, and if so, how much it benefited for having, several decades between you and at least the events that spurred it.
What was the last part of the question?
Sorry, how useful you think it was to have a distance between your writing this book and the events that actually spurred the story.
Well, I'm sure it was totally necessary, and that's the reason why it took this long to do it. I I really believe that with memoir, you do it when you're ready, and you probably can't do it before. I'm amazed by some of the artists whose work I really admire. People like Justin Green and Phoebe Gleckner, who did these very personal memoirs that are some of the best work I've seen in comics. And they did these books when they were in their late 20s, early 30s. I think it's incredible that they could face that stuff and deal with it, because usually these things are too raw for you to handle at a really young age. And so I think the distance is really important. Um, the other thing that I really have to factor in is that, because I would really say this book is, in terms of its content, probably much more about my relationship with my parents than it is with my relationship with my headmaster. I didn't have a relationship with the guy. I just avoided him for the most part, and he abused me, and I avoided him as much as possible. That's not a relationship. With one's parents, a lot of what's happening in the book is trying to wake them up to what actually happened there. Now, because my parents are not alive, I could draw this with impunity and draw it as I experienced it, not as like a way to get even or anything like that, because I try not to make anybody look either bad or good in this book, including myself, but just to feel free to be able to draw it as you saw it, you know? Um, and I think that distance can really be required for that, because it's not, experience isn't breathing down your neck if you've got enough experience to, if you have enough time to work with that experience, you know?
I'm going to invite up one of the two Roberts that we currently have in the room right now. Wait a moment for, actually, one of the one Roberts that we now have in the room right now. Hey, Robert, do you have a question for Glenn?
Yeah. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Hey,
can.
yeah. Hey, Glenn, how are you? This is Rob Green. I tweeted at you after I read the book. I'm a 52-year-old male who went through sexual abuse when I was 8 to 10 years old. And the stuff that you wrote about, and I'm glad you were recently discussing the relationship with your parents. I've gone through for years, and it's a combination of trying to get them to wake up, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
the guilt feelings that I have because I have two boys. I have a wife. My wife is super protective and, has trouble dealing with my parents. And all of the other things that you've spoken about throughout your life, that it really was impactful for me that you were, and I've never been a comic reader.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I was interested in, but the content and even the comic part was really, the illustrations was intriguing, and it was just amazing, and it really touched me. And I just wanted to say thank you for writing it and for sharing, because I still read this stuff just to try to help myself get through it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first part, is a thank you. The second part is, have you gone to a lot of therapy? Because you sound so even keeled about this, and it's shocking to me.
Oh,
I'm envious.
oh, well, listen, thanks very much. I really appreciate your kind words about all this. And yeah, I have done a lot of therapy. Um, I I yeah, and the question points to something, which is that it's not something that's talked about much in the book. You know, in the book, in the foreword, it mentions that it's not a recovery memoir, and I've been asked about that a lot. And my point is that I believe actually that the spiritual moments of recovery that people do find in AA rooms and other rooms like that, it's almost as if people that are there are sharing spiritual moments, and those moments I don't believe can or should be used too much for artistic purposes. That's just a personal belief.
Right.
And I also believe that this is just from a critic's standpoint as a cartoonist. When I've seen other cartoonists include their therapy in their comics, it kind of falls flat for me, because that's their process that they have to deal with emotionally. That's not something they should be showing me. They should deal with that process and then put it in their work. You know what I mean? So that's just my own personal take on it. It's not, that doesn't mean it can't be used, but yeah, I've been around the block with therapy. Sure, I
Okay.
would.
I just listen. I know I'm going to be cut off, and there's other people to talk to, but
No, go ahead, Robert. That was that was a great question, and one I was probably going to ask eventually. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm glad. I think you guys are doing a great job interviewing Glenn, especially with such a sensitive topic and one that's, not really spoken about. And like I said, I've read so much, and I'm trying to work through it. And having two boys, and when they were at the ages of 11 and 9, or 8 to 10, I was super overprotective, and it's manifested itself in so many other ways in my life that I struggle with. Workaholic, avoiding family. Family scares me, for all the reasons that you can imagine.
Sure.
Didn't support me. It wasn't someone in my family who did it to me. It's someone I met on a plane. I'm afraid to fly. I mean, you can imagine just all the things that you speak about with how it manifested itself with porn and alcohol. I just think it's really a difficult and sensitive topic. I just can't be thankful enough. Again, I was just totally impacted by this conversation and by your book.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Sure.
As a quick follow-up, on the subject of, you had said that this wasn't a recovery memoir, which is an interesting way of putting it. In the dealings that you have had with therapists with the subject matter, knowing that you are a creative person who makes comics, did you find that generally they were open to the idea of you eventually drawing a comic about it, and that therapists generally thought that it would be
well,
a useful release hub?
I wouldn't have a therapist who was like, gee whiz, you might not want to draw this or something. I mean, I would, and have had a therapist who I, can trust completely. And, I've shown her my work too. So my work is like just the essence of my life. So otherwise I wouldn't bother. But yeah, my therapist has seen my work, and so that's fine, but yeah, it's definitely okay by them to know what I'm doing and basically support it. Sure.
Another question I had was about you both, I think, in the introduction to the book, and then also just in this conversation, you've talked about yourself, emphasize this idea of yourself as an underground cartoonist, which obviously is this rich, wonderful tradition, but also not something you hear a lot anymore, that there are sort of people might say that are a graphic novel memoirist or an art comics person or something like that. And I'm curious why, like, that still feels like a core part of your identity, and to what extent, because I think you also emphasized that really was a key part of your approach to memoir.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I think that it had a lot to do with the fact that, like, with underground comics, first of all, they weren't good for you, and I like that. They weren't even reputable, even if you were over 18, but you weren't supposed to be reading them if you were younger than that. They were forbidden. And so for me, this is all good stuff. I really like material that is somehow pushing the envelope some way or other. And the idea of an underground existing simply means a sort of subcultural way of dealing with one's maybe unconscious, and are you willing to go there, and like the best cartoonists did that. My favorite cartoonists are not probably other people's, although I love a lot of different work and I respect a lot of different work, but a lot of the work that really moved me really had some rough edges to it. I think of like Mark Beyer or Rory Hayes or Justin Green, or a lot of these artists were really wrestling with something somehow or other. And some of them, it doesn't have to be autobiographical, but it always does appear to me that they're sort of excavating some part of their psyche and putting it on the page. And that to me is a distinctly underground thing to do, more than I think of. These can be just words, you know what I mean? But like, having been a music fan,
Sure.
you definitely knew there was a difference between pop and punk and new wave and all these things. So the labels aren't nothing either. So it's important to me that I come out of that tradition and that I feel a connection to that tradition, you know. Um, Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely trying to work within that tradition of comics. And that tradition could get a bad rap. It could mean like hippie comics and dope smoking comics and crap like that. Grateful Dead type stuff or something. I don't know. I don't know what the connotations are. Those aren't the ones that I think of. I think of Crumb and I think of others.
Right. I mean, it seems like those people that you've talked about, and Justin Green and Phoebe Glockner, like just that it seems very clear that that's like the tradition
Yeah.
that you're inspired by.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that was actually something that really inspired me about Phoebe Gloeckner because in her book Diary of a Teenage Girl, there is this connection within that book to underground comics. Like it's mentioned in that book that she writes to Crumb's wife, and there's a connection that is embraced and shown as being part of what she's doing. And that was really an inspiration for me in doing Chicago, because in Chicago, my character at age 19 decides to drop everything and hitchhike out to Chicago and ends up on the streets and meets Crumb, and the underground comics ethos and the whole idea of that became part of what drove the story. So that was partly inspired by Phoebe Gloeckner's book, because it made me realize that that could be valid as part of the subject matter of somebody's memoir, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the other kind of obvious way it sort of influences it is just in your visual style, that it is this kind
Yeah.
of, I don't really have the vocabulary to talk about, but it's clearly a very underground inflected style. I mean, as you moved into graphic novels and memoirs, did you try to kind of adapt it to this kind of more serious subject matter, or was it kind of like, well, this is how I draw, this is how it's going to come
It's
across? Because I
it's
mean, I think it actually works really well.
oh, thanks. I mean, I can't really adapt to anything. I just draw the way I draw. I that's another thing I will say. I feel a great affinity for artists with their limitations, as opposed to necessarily artists who have phenomenal facility. I like them too, but I like very much the sense of struggle that you could get with some underground cartoonists, that they were struggling to tell their story. They, in nearly every case, had a very strong visual voice, but yeah, that's something that was, it felt like something that was out of their control. And so you cultivate your voice and you try and expand it and speak better with it, but it's basically your voice and you can't change it. I've never been one of those cartoonists who could, like, I don't know, revamp my style for something. I don't know how anybody can do that. I could never do that. I pretty much just draw the way I draw.
One of the things that Robert's question touched on a little bit was your relationship with your parents, which is, the other massive hook. And in some ways, I think is really kind of the centerpiece of the book. I'm curious, are either of them still with us?
My parents?
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Oh, no, no,
Uh,
sorry. Glenn's parents, not Robert.
Oh, sorry.
But I'm
but I'm
glad you're
glad you're
still here,
also still
Robert.
with us.
Sorry, that was obnoxious. I
No,
apologize.
no,
Bye.
it's fine.
so,
Uh,
no, go ahead.
oh, no, no. So I was wondering if either of them are still around, and if so, or even if not, what their relationship has been to this really kind of hype, in some ways hyper confessional thing that you do on the comics page.
Well, the first part of the question is, the answer to that is no. My father died about 10 or 11 years ago, and my mother died about 2 months ago. She died shortly before the book came out, and it was after a long illness, so she wouldn't have been in any state to read anything I did. But the bigger question there of anything about their relationship to it or looking at it or anything, that really wouldn't have happened. They, like, didn't get it, and in some ways it hurts if your folks don't get what you do. They tolerated it. I mean, I went to art school. I studied it. If they saw my work in the Wall Street Journal, they were really happy because that meant something they could understand. And my father was a avid fan of the Wall Street Journal, so that meant a lot to him to see my illustrations in there. I actually have that in the book, in fact, that he liked that. But
Yeah, that was great.
yeah, as far as them getting it, I would sometimes try to take on a sort of philosophical attitude that, like, you know, like Crumb said once, not everything's for kids, not everything's for everybody. He said that in the Crumb movie, and I thought that was excellent because, like, I think of underground comics of this kind as kind of an esoteric, rarefied pursuit. It's really not for everybody. You know what I mean? I mean, it's the only kind of comics I like. It's pretty much the only kind of comics I ever read. But, you know, a lot of people have really middle-brow tastes. They, first of all, they want something that isn't threatening. They want something that isn't challenging. They want something that isn't going to scare them. And on top of that, what they really want is they want to be told by somebody else what to read or what to like. You know what I mean? They want everybody else to do their dirty work for them. You know, if you're an artist, you don't understand that because the only stuff that you like is the stuff you like and the stuff you chase down and you're curious about. And you're probably very curious if you're an artist. So you're looking at things and thinking about them. But a great many people are just consumers, and they're going to consume what's in front of them. It doesn't matter how bad movies get; people are still going to probably go if they want to go to see movies. They're not looking at it through the lens that I might look at it through. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things I really loved about the book was how both honest it was, but also there wasn't this sort of effort to try to make it too neat and to sort of explain everything away. That it was obviously you sort of thought about it and processed it and gone to therapy, but at the same time it wasn't like you're watching like the biopic of Glenn's life, and that you allowed a lot of that sort of messiness to be there and allowed the reader to kind of make sense of it for themselves.
right.
And and then so just another thing I'm just curious about is now that you've done two memoirs, do you feel like there's more material that you want to tackle in memoir, or do you think the next project will be in a different vein?
No, the next one will be too, although it may be entitled an autobiographical graphic novel simply because it's going to have family in it, and I don't know that they're going to like it. Some of my sisters maybe, but the next one, yeah, I had always planned in the doing of these memoirs for it to be a cycle of a trilogy of them where I'm able to work out different things that happened and to hopefully go deeper in each one, which I think I did. I think that you know more about my character and what he's been through by the end of Chartwell Manor than you did in Chicago, which sort of skimmed along the surface of the character's personality and disturbances. And you go deeper in the next book, Chartwell Manor, and the third book will have even greater interiority. And some of what it's about is my best friend's death at the age of 21. He was a guy I knew who was my best friend and was in some ways, a little bit of a mixed bag, but he died, and the effect that had on me, and that's sort of the scaffolding on which a lot of the rest of the book is going to be built. So that's what's great about the graphic novel, by the way. You can really work out a lot of stuff. You can work out themes, you can really explore, and that is very exciting. I didn't really get that before doing the graphic novel, but once I got into it, I just saw how much can really be done with it, in terms of, like, say, emotional content. You don't have the same options with a comic book, in my opinion.
So, and we can conclude on this because we're at about an hour. But piggybacking on Anthony's question, given that there are other threads that you want to follow on this story, how much is Chartwell Manor something that is Chartwell Manor the place and the experience? Is that something that you think will continue to be, if not pervasive, at least a key element in your autobiographical work going forward?
Pervasive, the feel of it and how it's affected me in my life.
Specifically, the experience of the school, rather than referring to the book, that there will be sort of elements in that experience of your life, whether that will continue to be just a part of your autobiographical work going forward.
Well, I mean, the experience of it is just going to probably follow me around in ways forever that won't go away. That's one thing that I said in the introduction, that like the book isn't a recovery memoir, but about the scars that we have and how we learn to live with them. So, I mean, the way really that I learned to live with them was by drawing this book. As far as where I'll feel, how I'll feel, where I'll be a year from now, having drawn it, I really can't say. I'm inclined to feel that I'll feel good about it, simply because the reaction to the book has been uniformly positive by everyone. And so I don't feel like I shot myself in the foot by doing it. So, the truth of the matter is, I really live for my art. And this is one thing I've pointed out, that some people find it really hard to imagine putting the stuff that I've put out, on the page and getting it published and getting it out there and all of that. But what that misses is the fact that this is an ambitious book, and I'm actually trying to do great work. I'm trying to do work that does measure up to people like Crumb and Phoebe Gleckner and Justin Green. So in a certain sense, the material itself is really just material, and it has to work, and it has to be good. It has to read. It has to be entertaining. It has to be something that when you pick it up, you can't put it down. I'm dealing with the same metrics that any cartoonist, any comic book artist is dealing with, So I don't know if that answers anything. It's just that, like, I guess in a way it does. Maybe it really does reiterate the point that the things that you go through, if you get to the point where you can use them as material, they're probably not eating you alive anyway,
Great. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us.
Okay.
Glenn's Twitter handle is Glenn O'Head. You can also, his website is the same, glennohead.com. His book, Chartwell Manor, is out on Fantagraphics, and I think I speak for both Anthony and myself, and probably Heidi as well, when I say that it's a tremendous read and highly worth checking out. Anthony, you want to plug anything before we go?
No, I mean, everyone should. I mean, it sounds like, Robert's already read Chartwell Manor, but anyone listening to this later, should definitely read.
Read Chartwell Manor.
Everyone else should read Chartwell Manor. And also, I have a podcast, Original Content, where we review Netflix and other streaming shows. So check that out.
Great. You can find me on Twitter at bheater. RIYL Podcast is an interview, a podcast where I do interviews such as this one. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
I really appreciate being on, man. Thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed talking. Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.